Have you ever been erased from your own family's story? Not by fate, not by strangers, but by the very people who were supposed to love you the most? Imagine sitting in a lawyer's office, your heart pounding, the walls closing in, waiting for your name to be spoken during the reading of your grandmother's will. Only to hear silence. No mention, no recognition. It was as if you never existed. My name is Scarlett, and this is the story of how my family betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. They stripped me of my inheritance, handed everything, the Parker estate, the land, the home filled with generations of memories, to my older brother. They thought I would bow my head, accept my place in the shadows, and disappear. But what they did not know was that my grandmother was wiser than all of them. Long before she passed away, she left behind something they had overlooked. It was not jewelry. It was not money hidden under the floorboards. It was a legal clause, an easement in my name. It was buried so deeply in the county records that no one thought to look for it. But years later I did. And when I held that paper in my hands, I realized I had the weapon I needed to turn their betrayal into my revenge. They thought the estate was theirs forever. They thought I had lost, but they never read the fine print. Before I tell you the full story, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt ignored? Have you ever been treated as if you were invisible, as if your voice did not matter? If you have, then you will understand the fire that carried me through the darkest years of my life. And if my journey speaks to you, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel, because here we tell the stories that prove even the most silent voices can rise and be heard. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. When I look back on my childhood, it feels like a faded photograph, pieces of warmth mixed with shadows I did not yet understand. My parents were present, but their love often felt conditional, like it was measured out carefully, spoonful by spoonful, depending on how well I pleased them. My older brother Daniel, on the other hand, never had to earn their affection. He was the golden child, the chosen heir, the one who could do no wrong. But in the quiet corners of my life, where my parents' approval rarely reached, there was someone who made me feel whole. That person was my grandmother, Margaret Parker. To me, she was not just a grandmother. She was my anchor, my safe place, and the only person who truly saw me for who I was. Grandma lived in a small cottage on the edge of the estate. While my parents spent their evenings hosting parties or discussing Daniel's future, I would slip away and run across the fields to her porch. She would always be there, sitting in her old rocking chair, a knitted shawl over her shoulders and a book resting in her lap. The moment she saw me, her face would light up with a smile that made me feel like I belonged in this world. "Scarlett," she would say, opening her arms, "you carry more strength than you know." Those evenings were the happiest of my childhood. We would sit together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. She would tell me stories about her own youth, stories of hardship, of courage, of survival. Grandma had lived through times that had tested her spirit, yet she carried herself with grace. She believed that wisdom was the true inheritance, not wealth or land. One night, when I was about 12, I remember asking her why she always wrote so many letters and documents. Her desk was always cluttered with papers, and I would watch her carefully fold them into envelopes. She looked at me with those piercing gray eyes and said, "Because words, Scarlett, are stronger than stone. Property can be stolen, money can vanish, but a written word, sealed and witnessed, can protect you when no one else will." At the time, I did not understand. I thought it was just one of her lessons, like so many others. But years later, when I discovered the easement she had left behind, those words would echo in my mind like prophecy. My bond with Grandma was not something my parents approved of. They thought I was wasting my time sitting with her instead of preparing myself to be useful. My mother once told me bluntly, "Scarlett, you should spend less time with your grandmother and more time learning how to support your brother. That is where your future lies." I remember the sting of those words. Support your brother, as if my life's purpose was to stand in Daniel's shadow. But Grandma would never let me believe that. She would hold my hand, her skin wrinkled and soft, and whisper, You were not born to live in anyone's shadow. You are the fire, Scarlet. One day, they will see it. Those moments shaped me in ways I only realized much later. It was also Grandma who taught me about the estate, the history of the land, the boundaries, the legal stories woven into its foundation. While my parents and Daniel only cared about the estate's prestige, Grandma cared about its truth. She explained to me what an easement was, how property rights worked, and why every document mattered. I never knew why she bothered to explain such things to me at the time, but I listened. I absorbed every word, because she made me feel like it mattered. On my 16th birthday, she gave me a gift I will never forget: a leather-bound journal with my initials pressed in gold. Inside the first page, she had written, "For Scarlet, may you always write your own destiny, even when others try to steal it from you." I did not realize it then, but she was preparing me for the future. She knew the day would come when I would need the strength to fight back. The last year of her life was the hardest. She grew weaker, spending more time in bed, but even then, she would smile when I walked into her room. I remember one evening, sitting beside her, holding her hand as she whispered, "Do not let them take what is yours, Scarlet." "Promise me that," I promised. I promised with tears streaming down my face, not knowing that within months she would be gone. And when she passed away, something inside me broke. The world suddenly felt colder, emptier. What I did not know was that her love had left me more than memories. It had left me a hidden weapon, buried in the very foundation of the estate. At her funeral, while Daniel basked in attention and my parents carried themselves with pride, I stood quietly by her grave, clutching that journal, and I swore to myself, no matter what happened, I would honor her words. I had no idea just how much I would need them. The day of the will reading is burned into my memory with a clarity I wish I could erase. It was a late autumn afternoon, the kind where the sky hangs heavy and gray, and the air feels thick with something unspoken. The Parker estate, the house I had grown up in, the house that was supposed to belong to both Daniel and me, stood behind me like a silent judge as I walked toward the lawyer's office in town. I remember the sound of my heels clicking against the pavement as I entered the building. Each step echoed louder than it should have, like a countdown to something inevitable. The office smelled of old wood and leather, the kind of place where secrets are folded into documents and sealed with signatures. Inside, my parents were already seated at a long oak table. My father, stern and unreadable, with his arms crossed. My mother, polished and proud, her lips pressed tightly together as if she were already bracing for judgment. And of course, Daniel. He leaned back in his chair, confidence radiating from him, as though the outcome had already been written in his favor. I sat quietly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. The lawyer, Mr. Collins, adjusted his glasses and opened a thick folder filled with papers. The rustle of those pages was deafening in the silence of the room. When he began to read, his voice was steady, professional, without emotion. "This is the last will and testament of Margaret Parker." Hearing her name nearly broke me. My grandmother had been gone only weeks, and the grief was still raw. I wanted to hear her voice, not this dry recital of legal phrases, but I forced myself to listen, clinging to the hope that somewhere in those pages my name would be spoken, my place in the family acknowledged. The lawyer went on, listing personal items she had left, jewelry to a cousin, keepsakes to an old friend, small donations to charity. Then came the part I had been waiting for. As for the Parker estate, including the house and all surrounding land, my breath caught in my throat. "I hereby leave full ownership and rights to my grandson, Daniel Parker." The words hit me like a knife. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, the air collapsing around me. I waited, desperate for another sentence. Something like "and to my granddaughter Scarlet." But nothing came. The lawyer simply continued, his voice steady, as though he had not just erased me from everything I had ever known. I looked at my parents, searching for any flicker of remorse, any sign of recognition. But my father sat stone-faced, his eyes fixed on the table. My mother glanced at me once, then quickly away, as if ashamed but unwilling to speak. Daniel, however, smiled. a small, smug smile that told me he had known all along. He leaned back further in his chair, folded his hands behind his head, and looked at me as though I were a guest at my own funeral. The lawyer finished reading, closed the folder, and said, "That concludes the will." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I could feel my throat tightening, my hands trembling in my lap. My voice barely worked when I whispered, "There must be a mistake." Mr. Collins adjusted his glasses again and shook his head. "I am afraid the document is clear. The estate is transferred solely to Daniel Parker." I turned to my parents, my eyes burning. "You knew about this? You knew she was cutting me out?" My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. My father finally spoke, his tone cold and deliberate. "Scarlett, you must understand. Daniel is the eldest. It has always been tradition for the estate to pass to the son. Tradition." That word tasted like poison. "And what about me?" I asked, my voice rising with each syllable. "Do I not matter? Did Grandma think I was worthless?" Daniel laughed quietly. "Do not take it so personally, Scarlett. Maybe she just knew I could handle the responsibility. You were always more sentimental." The word stung, as though being sentimental was a flaw. I wanted to scream, to fight, to tear those papers into shreds. But I sat frozen, my nails digging into my palms, my body trembling with rage I could barely contain. The lawyer excused himself, gathering the documents and leaving us in the silence of our fractured family. When the door clicked shut, my father leaned forward. "This is for the best," he said firmly. "You should focus on building your own life, Scarlett. Be independent. You do not need the estate. Independent." That word echoed in my mind, sharp and cruel. It was the same excuse they had used years earlier when they refused to help with my college education. Be independent. What they meant was, you are on your own. You do not matter. I left the office that day numb, my legs carrying me forward even though I felt like collapsing. Outside, the cold autumn wind stung my face, but the pain inside was worse. I walked past the estate gates, looking up at the house that had been my home, and for the first time, it felt like a stranger. That night, I cried in silence. Not just for what I had lost, but for what I had finally realized. My family had never truly seen me. I was invisible to them, an afterthought. But deep down, beneath the grief and anger, something else began to stir. A spark, a memory of my grandmother's voice whispering, "You were not born to live in anyone's shadow. You are the fire, Scarlett. One day, they will see it." I did not know how, and I did not know when, but I swore to myself that I would make them regret this betrayal. What I could not have imagined then was that Grandma had already given me the weapon I needed. Hidden in a forgotten file, waiting to be discovered, was the easement that would change everything. But for now, all I felt was the crushing weight of betrayal, and the fire quietly growing inside me. The weeks after the will reading felt like wandering through a storm without shelter. Every corner of my world had shifted, every certainty stripped away. The estate that had once been my home now belonged to Daniel. I was nothing more than a visitor, tolerated but unwanted, as though my very presence was a reminder of something inconvenient. I moved into a small apartment in town, far from the grand halls and polished floors I had known all my life. It was a modest place, creaking floorboards, peeling paint on the walls. But it was mine. For the first time, I had to cook for myself, pay rent, and build a life without the safety net my family had denied me. During the day, I worked odd jobs. Waitressing, clerical work, anything that kept the bills paid. At night, I would sit by the small window in my apartment, staring at the estate lights glittering on the hill in the distance. Each glow felt like a taunt, a reminder that Daniel was sleeping comfortably in the rooms that should have been mine. My parents rarely called. When they did, the conversations were cold, transactional, as though they were checking a box. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed to take pleasure in reminding me of what I had lost. On more than one occasion, he sent smug invitations to family gatherings at the estate, clearly designed to rub salt in the wound. I ignored them all. Loneliness became a heavy companion, but so did determination. I remembered Grandma's words, echoing like a heartbeat. "Do not let them take what is yours, Scarlett. Promise me that." That promise became the thread I held onto when everything else unraveled. Years passed this way, struggling, surviving, always carrying the ache of betrayal. I thought often of Grandma, of the quiet evenings on her porch, of the lessons she had left me. I would open the journal she had given me on my 16th birthday and read her inscription again and again. May you always write your own destiny, even when others try to steal it from you. And then, one night, destiny began to shift. It started with a visit to the county records office. I had gone there for something unrelated, renewing a document for work. The office was dusty and cluttered, with shelves stacked high with boxes of files no one had touched in years. As I waited for the clerk to return, my eyes wandered over the shelves. I noticed a section labeled Parker Estate. Something inside me stirred. Curiosity, anger, hope. I asked the clerk if I could look through the files. He shrugged and told me most of it was old paperwork, nothing useful. But I insisted. Hours slipped by as I sifted through yellowed pages and brittle folders. Deeds, tax records, property maps. Each document felt like a puzzle piece of a history I thought I knew. And then, buried deep in a folder so old it was falling apart, I found it. A single document, handwritten and signed in my grandmother's unmistakable script. The words blurred for a moment as my eyes filled with tears. It was an easement agreement, granting me specific legal rights to a portion of the estate land. Not just access, but authority. Authority that could challenge Daniel's claim to full ownership. My hands trembled as I read it over and over, hardly able to believe what I was seeing. Grandma had not forgotten me. She had not erased me. She had left me a weapon, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the day I would need it. The clerk noticed my expression and asked if I was all right. I quickly nodded, clutching the paper as though it might vanish if I let go. "I am fine," I whispered, though inside a fire roared to life. That night I barely slept. I spread the document out on my kitchen table, studying every line, every clause. The language was legal and complex, but I remembered Grandma's lessons. She had once told me, "Scarlett, the law is nothing more than words arranged with power. Learn the words, and you will learn the power." For the first time since the betrayal, I felt that power stirring inside me. The easement was ironclad. It had been filed officially, witnessed, and recorded. Daniel might have inherited the estate, but he did not own it free and clear. My rights, written in Grandma's hand, were undeniable. The realization hit me like lightning. I had a chance to fight back, a chance to turn the humiliation they had forced on me into justice. But I also knew I had to be careful. If Daniel or my parents discovered what I held, they would try to bury it, to twist it, to destroy it before I could act. I needed help. Someone who understood the law better than I did. Someone who could turn this paper into a weapon sharp enough to cut through years of betrayal. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer of my own. Walking into that office, clutching Grandma's easement in my hand, I felt something I had not felt in years. Strength. For so long I had been powerless, invisible, forgotten. But now, with this document, I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was Scarlett, and I was ready to rise. The morning I stepped into the office of Attorney Michael Reeves, the world felt different. I carried Grandma's easement in a folder pressed tightly against my chest, like a soldier clutching their last weapon. For years I had walked through life powerless, silenced by betrayal. But now, for the first time, I held proof that my family had underestimated me. Mr. Reeves was an older man with sharp eyes that seemed to cut straight through pretense. His office smelled faintly of tobacco and old books, the shelves lined with thick volumes of case law. He greeted me with a firm handshake and gestured for me to sit. "What brings you here, Miss Parker?" he asked. I hesitated, then opened the folder and slid the document across his desk. "This," I said softly. "I think it changes everything." He adjusted his glasses and began reading. Minutes passed in silence as his eyes scanned the page. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, a slow smile tugging at his lips. Well, he murmured. "This is not just a sentimental keepsake. This is a binding easement agreement, filed properly with the county. Do you realize what this means? I swallowed hard. I think so, but I need you to tell me. It means, he said, tapping the paper, that your grandmother granted you permanent legal rights over a portion of the estate. Your brother may hold the deed, but he does not hold absolute authority. If he has been operating under the assumption that he owns it all, he is in for a rude awakening. For the first time in years, I felt the corners of my mouth lift into a genuine smile. So I can fight this? Fight it? Reeves chuckled. Scarlett, with the right strategy, you can do more than fight. You can control how the estate is used, challenge his decisions, even block certain developments if they interfere with your easement. This document is leverage. And leverage, he leaned forward, lowering his voice, is the cornerstone of revenge. The word sent a thrill down my spine. Revenge. We spent hours going through every line of the easement, dissecting the legal language. Reeves explained how we could use it, how to file motions, how to make sure Daniel could not simply sweep it under the rug. By the time I left his office, I felt as though I were holding not just a document, but a sword, sharpened and ready. The first move came quickly. Reeves filed a notice with the county, formally asserting my rights under the easement. It was a simple act on paper, but it sent shockwaves through the family. Within days, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed Mother. I hesitated before answering. Her voice came sharp, almost panicked. Scarlett, what have you done? I kept my tone calm, steady. I have done what Grandma intended. I have claimed what is mine. You are tearing this family apart, she hissed. Why could you not just let things be? I almost laughed at the irony. You let things be when you erased me from her will. Did you think I would just sit quietly forever? She had no reply, only a sharp intake of breath before the line went dead. Not long after, I received a summons to the estate. Daniel wanted a discussion. Against Reeves's advice to avoid direct confrontation, I went. I needed to see their faces. The estate looked different that day, though nothing about the house had changed. It was my perspective that had shifted. No longer was I the powerless daughter returning to beg for scraps. I walked through those gates with my head high, armed with the knowledge that they had underestimated me. Daniel was waiting in the drawing room, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his posture as arrogant as ever. My parents sat nearby, their expressions tight with discomfort. Well, Daniel drawled, look who finally decided to play lawyer. I met his gaze steadily. I am not playing, Daniel. This is real. The easement is valid. Grandma gave me rights and I intend to use them. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think a piece of paper changes anything? The estate is mine, Scarlett. Always has been. Always will be. I pulled a copy of the easement from my bag and laid it on the table. Not entirely. You should have read the fine print. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He glanced at the paper, then at our parents. My father's jaw clenched. My mother looked away. This is ridiculous, Daniel snapped. You are trying to steal what is mine. No, I said firmly. I am taking back what was stolen from me. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Finally, my father spoke, his voice low. Scarlett, this path will only bring pain. Let it go. I shook my head. No. I promised Grandma I would not let you take what was mine. And I intend to keep that promise. Daniel slammed his glass down so hard the liquid spilled across the table. You will regret this, he spat. But as I looked at him, at all of them, I realized the balance of power had shifted. For the first time, they were not in control. For the first time, they feared me. I left the estate that night with my heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Their anger, their panic, their disbelief. It was only the beginning, because revenge is not delivered in a single strike. It is a game of patience, of strategy, of letting your enemies believe they still hold the reins until you pull them away completely. And I was ready to play. The morning I walked into Attorney Michael Reeves's office, I felt different. For years I had carried nothing but anger and grief, but now, in my hands, I carried power. My grandmother's easement. Reeves was an older man with sharp eyes and the calm assurance of someone who had seen countless battles. I laid the document before him, my voice trembling. "I need to know if this means anything." He studied it in silence, then looked up with a slow smile. "Miss Parker, this is not just paper. This is leverage. Your grandmother gave you enforceable rights over the estate. Your brother does not own it outright, not with this on record. If he thought otherwise, he is in for a surprise." My heart raced. For years I had been powerless, invisible, but in that moment, I realized I had a weapon strong enough to strike back. Reeves filed the claim within days, officially registering my rights with the county. The effect was immediate. My phone rang late one evening, my mother's number flashing on the screen. "Scarlett," she said sharply, "what have you done? Do you know how much trouble you are causing?" I steadied my voice. "I claimed what was mine. Grandma wanted it this way. You are tearing this family apart," she snapped. "No," I replied coldly. "You did that the day you erased me from her will." She went silent. Then the line went dead. The next morning, an invitation arrived from Daniel. He wanted to discuss the matter at the estate. Against Reeves's advice, I went. Walking into the drawing room, I saw Daniel lounging with a whiskey in hand, arrogance radiating from him. My parents sat nearby, tension etched into their faces. "So," Daniel sneered, "you found some dusty old paper. You think that changes anything?" I pulled a copy of the easement from my bag and slid it across the table. "It changes everything. You never read the fine print." For the first time, his confidence cracked. He glanced at the document, his smirk faltering. My father's jaw tightened. My mother looked down at her hands. Daniel slammed his glass onto the table. "You are trying to steal what is mine." "No," I said firmly. "I am taking back what you tried to steal from me." The silence stretched. Finally, my father spoke, his voice cold. "Scarlett, let this go. You will only bring misery to yourself." I met his gaze without flinching. "I promised Grandma I would not let you take what was mine. And I intend to keep that promise." When I left the estate that evening, I could feel their eyes burning into my back. They were angry, unsettled, but most importantly, they were afraid. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted, and I intended to make them feel every ounce of the fear they had once forced on me. The county courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old dust, a place where secrets met judgment. I had never imagined myself here, yet here I was, standing against my own family. Daniel sat at the opposing table, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, arrogance dripping from every gesture. My parents flanked him, silent but complicit. I sat with Attorney Reeves, clutching the easement document like it was both a shield and a sword. The judge entered, a stern woman with eyes sharp enough to cut through lies. The room rose, then settled into tense silence. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. Daniel's lawyer spoke first, his voice oozing confidence. "Your Honor, this so-called easement is outdated and irrelevant. The Parker estate belongs entirely to my client, Daniel Parker. This challenge is nothing more than a desperate attempt by his estranged sister to disrupt his rightful inheritance." I clenched my fists beneath the table. Estranged. Desperate. They wanted to paint me as an outsider in my own home. Reeves stood, calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, the easement was signed, notarized, and filed legally with the county. It grants my client, Scarlett Parker, perpetual rights to specific portions of the estate, rights that supersede unilateral control. This is not desperation. This is law." The judge adjusted her glasses, scanning the document. Silence stretched across the courtroom like a wire pulled tight. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Parker, did you know of this easement?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "No, but it does not matter. The estate is mine." "On the contrary," the judge replied, her tone clipped. "It matters greatly." For the first time, Daniel's confidence wavered. His lawyer shuffled papers, trying to regain control. But Reeves pressed forward, pointing out clause after clause where the easement restricted Daniel's authority. Each word landed like a hammer, breaking the illusion of his dominance. When the judge finally ruled, her words cut through me like a bolt of electricity. "The court recognizes the validity of the easement. Scarlett Parker's rights are hereby affirmed, Any attempts to override these rights will be considered a violation of property law. The gavel struck once, final and undeniable. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath. For the first time in years, justice had leaned in my direction. Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His face burned crimson, rage radiating off him. "This is not over," he hissed across the aisle, his voice low but venomous. I met his glare steadily. "No," I whispered back. "It is only beginning." As I walked out of the courtroom, the weight I had carried for years felt lighter. My parents avoided my eyes, shame flickering briefly across their faces. But Daniel's fury was unmistakable. He had lost his first battle, and he knew it. Outside, the autumn wind brushed against my face, cool and sharp. I looked at the courthouse steps, at the city bustling around me, and for the first time, I did not feel small. This was more than victory. It was a crack in the fortress my family had built against me, and now that crack would spread, because revenge is not won in a single moment. It unfolds piece by piece, until the very people who once dismissed you are left standing in ruins. And Daniel Parker had just taken his first step toward ruin. Daniel's silence after the courtroom defeat did not last long. Within a week, the retaliation began. It started subtly. The maintenance staff who used to care for the garden section I controlled under the easement suddenly stopped showing up. Trash mysteriously piled near the boundary lines of my portion of the estate. Contractors who had once been polite now treated me like an intruder. Daniel's message was clear. "You may have won in court, but you will never truly belong here." One evening, I drove past the estate and saw construction equipment lined up along the northern fence line, my easement territory. Bulldozers, trucks, and men with blueprints milled about, preparing to dig. My stomach dropped. I confronted the foreman on site. "What are you doing here?" "This section is protected under the easement," he shrugged. "Orders from Mr. Parker. He says it is his land." The anger that burned through me was hot enough to choke. Daniel thought he could simply bulldoze the law, the same way he had bulldozed me all my life. I called Reeves immediately. "He is breaking the order." By the next morning, Reeves had filed an injunction. Within days, a sheriff arrived at the estate with paperwork halting Daniel's construction. The workers dispersed, muttering. Daniel's fury echoed across the property when he realized his plan had failed. But the attacks kept coming. My mailbox was filled with anonymous letters. Cruel words calling me greedy, selfish, ungrateful. My car tires were slashed outside my apartment, and yet, I knew exactly who was behind it, even if I had no proof. Still, instead of breaking me, each act hardened my resolve. Daniel wanted me rattled. Instead, I grew sharper. I began to study the easement in ways even Reeves had not suggested. I pored over old county maps, cross-referencing land surveys, looking for hidden strength in Grandma's gift. And then, I found it. Buried in the fine print was a clause not just granting me usage rights, but prohibiting commercial development within the easement area. In other words, if Daniel tried to profit from the estate, sell parcels, build resorts, lease land, my approval was required. It was more than protection. It was control. Armed with this discovery, I called Reeves again. "I do not just want to defend, Michael. I want to strike back." He listened as I explained the clause, his voice calm but edged with excitement. "Scarlett, if we enforce this, Daniel cannot monetize the estate without your consent." He is cornered. The next move came swiftly. Reeves sent a formal notice to potential buyers Daniel had been courting, informing them that any commercial deal would be legally blocked unless approved by me. Within days, the deals collapsed. Daniel stormed into my apartment building not long after, pounding on my door so violently the neighbors peeked out from behind their doors. When I opened it, his face was twisted with rage. "You think you are clever?" he spat. "You think one scrap of paper makes you powerful?" I stood my ground. "Not clever, Daniel. Careful. And Grandma made me powerful long before you realized it." He stepped closer, his voice low and venomous. "This is war, Scarlett. You will not win." For the first time, I smiled at him. Not a smile of fear, but of certainty. "I already have, Daniel. You just have not seen the ending yet." He stormed away, his threats echoing down the hallway. But I knew something he did not. I was no longer on the defensive. I was building a strategy piece by piece, and he was already dancing in the trap. Because revenge was never about one battle. It was about control, patience, and precision, and Daniel had just given me all three. By the time winter settled in, the battle between Daniel and me was no longer hidden. The estate that had once been a private fortress became the stage for a very public war. News of the injunctions and collapsed business deals spread quickly through town. People whispered in cafes, neighbors exchanged glances at the grocery store. The story was irresistible. The forgotten daughter striking back at her wealthy brother, using the law as her weapon. For years, I had been invisible. Now everyone wanted to hear my side. A local journalist reached out, asking for an interview. Reeves hesitated. Publicity was risky, but I agreed. Sitting across from the reporter, I spoke calmly, carefully. I told them about Grandma's love, the easement, and the betrayal I had endured. I never once insulted my family, but the truth itself was damning. The article exploded online. Suddenly, I was no longer the estranged daughter. I was the rightful heir fighting to preserve her grandmother's legacy. Sympathy poured in from strangers. Messages filled my inbox. Stay strong. Your grandmother would be proud. Do not let them bully you. Daniel, of course, hated it. He confronted me outside the courthouse one morning, his face red with fury. "You are turning people against me," he snarled. I met his glare. "No, Daniel, you are doing that yourself." The real turning point came with the town council meeting. Daniel had been lobbying to approve a commercial development, luxury villas on estate land. He arrived confident, papers in hand, ready to charm the room. But when I stood and presented the easement clause prohibiting commercial use, the atmosphere shifted. Gasps rippled through the chamber as I explained, clearly and firmly, that any attempt to build without my consent would be illegal. The council had no choice but to side with me. Daniel's project was dead on arrival. The humiliation on his face was unforgettable. He had strutted into that room expecting applause, but left with whispers trailing behind him. As we walked out, a crowd had gathered outside the hall. Some clapped. Others offered words of encouragement. For the first time, Daniel was not the admired son, the untouchable heir. He was the man who had lost. Publicly, undeniably. That night, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city lights. The cold air bit against my skin, but inside, I felt a warmth I had not known in years. This was not just about land anymore. It was about dignity, about reclaiming the voice that had been silenced, about proving that betrayal could be answered with strength. Daniel was unraveling. His anger made him reckless, his schemes collapsing faster than he could rebuild them. And the more he fought, the clearer it became to everyone. He was losing control. I was no longer the quiet daughter cast aside. I was Scarlett Parker, and the tide had turned. The months that followed were a blur of hearings, meetings, and tense encounters. Daniel fought like a cornered animal, desperate to salvage what remained of his control. But each strike he threw seemed only to rebound against him. The final blow came not in court, but through the very people he had once commanded. Unbeknownst to Daniel, Grandma's easement held one more hidden strength. Reeves discovered it while combing through archival filings, a stipulation requiring annual community access to portions of the land. Grandma had wanted the estate to remain a part of the town's fabric, not just a fortress for her descendants. When I invoked this clause, it opened the gates, literally. For the first time in decades, townspeople were allowed onto the grounds for seasonal events, winter markets, spring fairs, community gardens. The estate, once a symbol of Daniel's arrogance, became a place of shared joy, and the people loved it. Local news covered the events, praising the decision as a gift from the forgotten granddaughter. Families picnicked under the old oak trees. Children played on lawns Daniel had once guarded jealously. The estate in their eyes was no longer his. It was ours. Daniel could not stand it. I still remember the night he stormed onto the property during a community event, shouting at volunteers to leave. Cameras caught everything. his face twisted in rage, his words dripping with entitlement. By morning, the footage had spread across social media. The man who once craved respect had become a laughingstock. Headlines called him the heir undone by his sister. Sponsors withdrew. Business partners cut ties. And then the final ruling came down from the court. Because of his repeated attempts to violate the easement, Daniel was fined heavily and stripped of management rights over the estate. Control passed to a neutral trustee, one who valued my voice in every decision. When the judgment was read, I sat silently, hands folded in my lap. Daniel stood across the aisle, pale and broken, his arrogance dissolved. He avoided my eyes as if unable to bear the weight of what he had lost. For years he had tried to erase me, but in the end, he had erased himself. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shoving microphones toward me. "Scarlett, how do you feel? What will you do now?" I paused, looking straight into the cameras. "This was never about destroying my brother," I said clearly. "It was about honoring my grandmother. She believed in fairness, in family, in legacy. I only did what she asked of me." The crowd erupted in applause, and in that moment I felt her presence. Grandma watching, proud. That night I returned to the estate. The house loomed in silence, but it no longer felt like a cage. I walked through the garden, my hand brushing the stone walls she had loved so dearly. For the first time in years, I did not feel bitterness. I felt peace. Revenge had not been the fire I thought it would be. It had been slower, colder, sharper. It had been justice delivered with patience, precision, and dignity. And in the end, I had won. Not just the estate, but myself. The estate is quiet now. Seasons pass, gardens bloom, and the walls no longer echo with shouting matches or whispered betrayals. Children run where I once cried alone. Families gather where I once felt invisible. The land feels alive again. And so do I. Looking back, I sometimes wonder how different things might have been if my parents had chosen fairness, if Daniel had chosen kindness. Perhaps there would have been no courtroom battles, no nights of fear, no scars left behind. But life rarely offers us the kindness we deserve. What it does offer, if we are patient enough to see it, is the chance to reclaim ourselves. For a long time, I thought revenge meant destruction, burning bridges, tearing down walls, leaving nothing behind but ashes. But that is not what my journey taught me. Revenge, I learned, can be quieter. It can be about standing tall when others try to make you small. It can be about protecting what was meant for you, even when the world insists you do not deserve it. It can be about turning pain into power. When Grandma wrote that easement, she was not just leaving me land. She was leaving me a choice to either surrender or to fight. And though it took me years, I finally chose to fight. I will not pretend it was easy. The nights were long, the fear was real, and the loneliness cut deep. But every step brought me closer to a truth I had nearly forgotten. I am not invisible. I never was. Daniel lost the estate, but more than that, he lost the illusion of control. And I gained not just property, but peace. To anyone listening, I hope you hear this. The people who betray you do not define you. Their choices do not erase your worth. Sometimes life will corner you, strip you of what feels like everything. But if you hold on to truth, to patience, to yourself, you will rise. And when you rise, rise with dignity. Rise in a way that leaves no doubt about who you are. Because revenge is not about screaming the loudest or striking the hardest. It is about showing the world that you were always stronger than they believed. As for me, I no longer think of myself as the girl who was left behind. I am Scarlett Parker, granddaughter, survivor, and finally, victor. And this is my story.